So, after World War One, America has become viewed once again as this big, huge world power. As we jumped in to the war, really that led for the tide to turn toward the Allied powers winning. Um, Troops and men came back to our country, and all of a sudden, our country just boomed, exploded with wealth, with prosperity, with power. And it was a great time for Americans in so many ways. And so, many Americans were shocked by just how horrible World War One was. It was a war unlike anything anybody ever thought could happen, and so it really changed the way that people lived their lives from day to day. Most people wanted to live for right now and stop focusing so much on the future and really the past. They just wanted to have fun and have a good time and enjoy life before something maybe bad happened again. Would there ever be another war like this? Let's take these times and really live life to the fullest. And so Americans really now, because of the way that industry and jobs were going, there was less working of 12, 14, 16-hour days like it used to be for many workers. And Americans had more leisure time, more free time to do what they wanted to and enjoy life. And so one of the things they did was become more and more entranced with sports. Specifically, baseball was the most popular sport. Americans loved to watch baseball, and a lot of these players became huge heroes and became huge, just like movie stars today and some super athletes. That's really when this first started, to where athletes became looked at and admired and were role models and heroes. And so people followed every move of some of these players. Specifically, Babe Ruth was the most popular player, viewed as the greatest baseball player that anybody had ever seen when we're talking about in the 1920s. And so here is actually a picture of where the Yankees, New York Yankees, used to play at the Polo Grounds. This is in 1923. Now they obviously have advanced stadiums, but back then you could see that there were large crowds that had begun growing as these stadiums were built. Babe Ruth was extremely talented, made the game exciting because any time he came up to the plate, he could potentially hit a home run. Nobody had seen anything like him before. And he led his team to win lots of championships. In 15 seasons, the team won 4 World Series championships, which means they're the champions of all of the major leagues. And so Babe Ruth was the best player on the best teams. He had many records throughout this time, including hitting more home runs than anybody had ever hit total in a career and in one season. Eventually, these records would not be broken for years and years to come. So people loved to listen on the radio to these baseball games and became a part of their everyday routine, is to take advantage of all the cool things happening on radio, whether it's music or sports or broadcasts. And so radio became huge in the 1920s. Here's a picture of Babe Ruth in 1920 on the Yankees. In addition to baseball, you have music becoming wildly popular at this time. And in the 1920s, it was known as the Jazz Age, where there was a lot of instruments related to jazz music, which we'll talk about. It's also known as the Roaring Twenties, big, loud music, parties and dancing and just having a good time. So the Jazz Age, or the Roaring Twenties in the 1920s, as it became known, was just a time where Americans really had fun. They enjoyed baseball, dancing, listening to the radio, and all the music that started to come out related to this new sound of jazz. It was developed among African Americans in the South, and quickly it spread throughout the United States. And so a lot of the big cities, you had these musical artists start to tour and go around the country and play. And even though African Americans were still mistreated and not given equal rights, a lot of times they were brought in to play music. And unfortunately, a lot of these places, African Americans couldn't even enter and be part of the crowd, but they were brought in the back just to perform. And so it really was the dynamic of showing segregation was still existed in the United States, very much so. But some of these artists, these musical artists, became heroes just like the athletes. And so you can see Ma Rainey and her Georgia Jazz Band, this picture. There are a lot of popular musical acts related, especially in the South at the time, that became just huge musically. One of them was Louis Armstrong. He was an African American musician, originally from New Orleans, and he made huge impact on music. He played trumpet, cornet, it's a type of looking trumpet looking thing, instrument, and he also sang. And so he was a success story. He originally was extremely poor, his family, and he rose and practiced and became the best at what he did, to where he became a legend. Even to today, his music is known as some of the best that's ever been made. And so a lot of times you'll see Louis Armstrong and with pictures, big old cheeks playing the trumpet. I know I played trumpet in middle school, and it's an instrument that can be super fun to play. Well, he started making sounds that nobody had ever heard before, and a lot of the music just became very popular. And so the Roaring Twenties, the jazz age, part of this was led by specifically Louis Armstrong was one of the huge musicians of the time. In addition to music, there was also um, related to arts and literature and just big, huge explosion of famous people related that were African Americans, that for the first time a lot of their work was being recognized. And so Harlem Renaissance was this time period where you have this tiny little place, Harlem, where so many people, famous people, came from this area. They came together, and it was a section of New York they made their home, Harlem, New York, in the 1920s, and it became this huge movement. Basically, this idea of culture, like people's traditions and what they did related to arts, writing, and stories and music. It became something where African Americans were able to express themselves, and they were extremely talented. And for the first time, really, they were recognized for all that they did, whether it's literature, music, theater, arts, politics. You had people not necessarily treated equal, but acknowledged as equal as far as talent and what they can do by many people, and started to be noticed, that really there's no reason to not look to the African American culture as something to really add value into people's lives. And so you have here where in Harlem, huge crowds of people really were part of something huge happening, that later on, as we look back at this time period, there's so many famous people that came from this area, and they inspired each other, given some more freedom to express themselves. And so Langston Hughes was one person that was a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. He wrote more than 60 books, poems, novels, stories, plays, poetry for children, musicals, operas, books that at this time like became one of the most successful people as far as this time period, white or black, to produce really an amazing amount of recognized, powerful literature and art. And so here's an example of one of his poems: Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. And so he became known for all of his awesome work. And even today, you'll see, as far as collections, some of his work is put up as some of the greatest that has ever been made. And so with Langston Hughes, he wrote from his experience. He was African American during this time period where he wanted to show people and celebrate his culture in the culture of his people. He used a lot of his writing related to jazz and the different rhythm of the sounds and songs and different dialects relating to his culture. And he helped readers understand that what it was like to live in a big city, in a growing country, in a prospering country, and what it was like to live during this time period of just an amazing life, but still having to deal with mistreatment by so many people all throughout this time period, and but finally having a little bit of a voice to share what those experiences are like. So as we study famous and important people during this time during Harlem Renaissance, truly Langston Hughes was an amazing man. And we're going to pick up some of the other famous people during this time period tomorrow.